Hello, and welcome to the Freedom Finances Show. It is Thursday, October 31st. My name is Bradley Valentine, and I'll be your host today. Today, we have a very special guest with us to talk about risk tolerance when it comes to investing and saving for retirement. John Goey is the host of the Make Better Wealth Decisions podcast, as well as author of his 2023 book, Bullshift: How Optimism Bias Threatens Your Finances. John is a portfolio manager out of Toronto, Canada, and has decades of experience in finances as well as helping people build their retirement. How are you doing today, John?
Very well, Bradley. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you on today. John, before we get started, was there anything that you wanted to let our audience know about your financial work in the past or what you're working on today?
So I've been a financial advisor for 31 years. That's how old I
Hmm.
am. And I made the transition to be a portfolio manager about halfway through in the aftermath of the global financial crisis. So I work on a discretionary basis. I because I'm in Canada, there's not exactly anything like an RIA in Canada, but
Okay.
I'm probably close to that in terms of working on an independent side and not being affiliated with any large institution. And I work with retail clients across the country, and I really love the work that I do. And I'm very active as an advocate. So I write. I've written probably 200 articles. I've done TV work. I've done radio work. I've written 3 books. So I'm out there pushing for consumers to get a better deal and to work more purposefully with the advisors that they engage.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, John. And at Freedom Finances, we're all about financial literacy and building financial knowledge for every person. That is our purpose. That is our goal. We want every person to understand how to understand their investments, how to understand budgeting. Is there one issue that you think most people get wrong or don't really understand when it comes to financing?
Yeah, the simple answer is behavioral economics and behavioral finance. Most people think finance is about crunching numbers and understanding. If I just understand what a PE ratio is, or what a management expense ratio is, or how to do these different asset allocation thingamabobs, I'll be good at managing money. In fact, most of good financial management requires managing your own emotions. And so we're biased. Everyone is biased, and a lot of people don't like to admit that bias and emotion plays a big role in their financial decision making. But the fact of the matter is, it does. And the extent to which you can be self-aware and monitor your behaviors and reflect upon, wait a minute, is that just because I'm anchored on this number, or is that because I'm
Hmm.
just averse to having a loss? Or is that because this is a rational thing that I would have done under any other circumstances as well? And those sorts of decisions are very hard to empirically quantify and to get your arms around. But I'm convinced that those are the most important things that we need to master as people who are engaged in personal finance.
I appreciate you sharing, and I want to go back to emotions. A lot of people who will study investing or the stock market learn that emotions kind of battle against us and battle against making strong investment moves. How would you say that, like normal people who are listening to this, can not use their emotions against them when whether it's like buying a stock or getting their retirement portfolio set up?
Right. So first off, it's we're all human. So I don't want anybody to think that, oh my goodness, I'm all emotional about this. The fact of the matter is, it's part and parcel with being human. And I think the most important thing that you can do is maybe read a book or two about behavioral finance. If you want to recommend one, the one that's probably the most universally known is Thinking Fast and Slow from Daniel Kahneman, who won the Nobel in 2002. The book came out, I don't know, 10 or 12 years ago. Kahneman died earlier in 2024, but there are others. There's a book called Nudge, which was co-written by Sunstein and Thaler, which is great about trying to get people to make different decisions. And there's a great book called Irrationally Exuberant, no, hang on. Predictably Irrational, that's what it's called, by Dan Ariely over at Duke. So there are a number of books that talk about that explain how we have these biases, how we make these emotional decisions, And Ariely actually says it's predictable. Like we make the same mistakes over and over again. We can show it empirically, and yet we still do it. So the extent to which we actually make the effort to be self-aware is the way that we can act, is probably the best thing we can do to actually nip it in the bud and prevent from making the same mistakes down the road.
Sure, that totally makes sense. And thank you for those resources. And I kind of want to move into like that, those personal feelings that when it comes to building your investment portfolio. And my question is for new investors or those who don't know much about investing, how do we use our risk tolerance to our advantage to help us make strong decisions?
The first thing I would say, Bradley, is most people don't have a very good handle on their risk tolerance because the questionnaires that the industry uses are oftentimes the sorts of boilerplate things that the firms will use to satisfy regulators that they've actually asked the questions, but they're not academically robust, which is to say they don't necessarily get a good handle on the trade-offs that are required in terms of risk and return. If you ask people, do you want high returns? They'll say, sure. They'll say, then, and what about risk? Do you want low risk? Yeah, I want low risk. Okay, well, do you realize that chances are if you want one, you're going to have to sacrifice the other? And a lot of questionnaires don't do it as well as you should. So try to get a good questionnaire. But what I said a moment ago is going to hold true again. However, you go about doing it, know yourself. One way of doing that is to say, let's say we imagine what happened in 1974, or imagine what happened in the global financial crisis. And you can say, let's say you had this portfolio, let's just use $1 million as an example. And as a result of what happened, just using benchmark returns, if you had this 60-40 portfolio, you would be down to $711,000. How would you feel about that? And then to actually ask someone to say, so if you were down by 29% on your balanced portfolio, are you sure you would rebalance the portfolio and sell some of your bonds to buy some stocks because stocks are on sale? That's what you said you'd do. That's what you put in your investment policy statement. That's what we've agreed to as we started our engagement. But will you actually do it? Because one of the things that I find is that people are all fine. Oh yeah, well, I understand. I know what my risk profile is. I'm sure that I would do this. And it's like the Mike Tyson story about everyone has a plan until they get
Mhm.
punched in the face. Everyone says they're going to rebalance their portfolio until they actually have to have the courage to sell the stuff that's doing okay in order to buy the stuff that's gone down recently. And then they suddenly don't have as much courage anymore.
So would you say it's more important to understand your risk tolerance and just make a plan off of it? Or is it better to be at a certain level on that scale of risk tolerance? Like, is it better to be high risk tolerance or low risk tolerance?
Yeah, it's the former. There's no right or wrong. Your tolerance is what it is, and if you just use a simple notional 8 out of 10, you've got a high risk tolerance. Okay, that's fine. Then you can have a riskier portfolio, and that's not good or bad. That's not right or wrong. That's just suitable for your disposition. And if you're the person who's more, even though you're in your 30s, you think like you're a grandma and you've got a 5 out of 10 risk profile because that's just what you need to have as a risk in terms of being able to sleep at night, then that's what kind of portfolio you should have. The best portfolio is one you can stick with. And if you're an 8 out of 10 and you can live with an 8 out of 10 portfolio and the market is in fact down by 20 or 30%, and as long as you can handle it, that's fine. What you don't want is you don't want someone to say, oh, I can handle an 8 out of 10. And then they realize, oh, now that I'm down this much, I guess I can't. I guess I can't handle it after all. That's when people start
Mm,
making emotional decisions that bite them. So get a portfolio that you're certain you can live with, and then stick to it.
awesome. Thank you so much. I want to keep sticking with that topic of risk tolerance. In your experience, have you seen people who have had that are so risk averse that have so little risk tolerance that it actually hurts them in the long run?
Now, those are people that I generally don't take as a client. So I'll say,
Mm,
let's say if you've got a scale of 1 to 10, anyone who say is a 5 or lower, you might want to just put your money into a guaranteed instrument.
mm.
And the bad news is the return won't be as high. The good news is you'll sleep well and you won't have to pay me or anyone like me or anyone like you any kind of a fee because
Sure.
you can just get it at a bank and get your guaranteed return, and that'll be that. Risk and return are related. And there are certainly some people who are too conservative for their own good. It depends. It's very personal, but I don't know. I would say that that's maybe 15 or 20% of the population that's just too conservative. A lot of people know they need to be taking more risk, but for whatever reason can't bring themselves to do it. And
Mm.
that reticence does hurt them over the course of a lifetime of investing.
Sure. Awesome. I love that. I love that conversation, and I agree. Understanding how risk adverse you are is really helpful in the process of understanding where you're going to go with your retirement, with your investments in the future. And you kind of talked about the different states of stock markets over the last 20, 30, 40 years. What's your current take on the strength of our stock market, whether it's in the US or internationally, over the last 5, maybe 10 years?
I think we're well. First off, I really really try hard not to offer a forecast because nobody knows.
Sure, sure.
Um, but I'll offer an opinion, which is
Okay,
which is different from a forecast.
I
Okay, so this is
understand.
not a forecast. This is just an opinion. My opinion is that the U.S. market is extremely expensive right now, and that there's a good deal of risk in the U.S. market in particular. So there are things like, Bradley. I don't know if you're familiar with the so-called Buffett ratio, which is the total stock market capitalization divided by the GDP. And in the U.S. right now, the Buffett ratio is well over 200%, which is about the 98th percentile. It's extremely expensive by historical standards. Similarly, there's this guy by the name of Robert Shiller, a guy, again, who won a Nobel Prize and coined the phrase irrational exuberance. Shiller is known for the so called CAPE ratio, the cyclically adjusted price earnings ratio. And the CAPE ratio for the S&P 500 right now is around 37. And once again, that's about the 98th percentile. So it's only about 1 year out of every 49 or 50 years that the US stock market has been as expensive as it is right now at the end of 2024. The only time it was actually more expensive on a prolonged basis was during the dot-com bubble in 2001. It was actually over 40. But at 37, where we are right now, it's one of the highest it has ever been. And to put it in perspective,
hmm
in 1929, when the market crashed, the CAPE ratio for the S&P 500 was 30. So the ratio was more than 20%. So the stock market today in late 2024 is more than 20% more expensive than it was when it crashed in the autumn of 2020 and 1929. So that ought to give you pause. Other markets around the world are also expensive, but not as expensive. I'm
Sure.
especially worried about the US market.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's been a conversation, especially within the last year when it comes to US politics, are prices, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. Do you think that inflation is part of the process just overall with price inflation, not just in the stock market, but of goods, of housing markets? Does that come into play with the process of the price of the stock market, or is that separate in your mind?
Comes into play. I think it comes into play more from a planning perspective. So if you're sitting down with a client and you're trying to map out how much money you're going to have when you're 65 and you want to retire, you need to look at your return expectations using real returns. So you can say, well, my balanced portfolio is going to get me, pick a number, 6.8%. Okay, that's 6.8%. Are you getting that 6.8% with inflation at 2.8 or is inflation at 3.8? Because the difference is a 1% delta in your real return. So now you're either getting 3% real or 4% real. So whether you get 3% above inflation or 4% above inflation, by the time you're 65 years old, can mean hundreds of thousands of dollars of difference in terms of your purchasing power. So historically, real returns are constant. The more inflation you have, the more stock market returns go. So basically, if inflation is 2%, the stock market goes up by 7. If inflation is 3%, you probably expect the stock market to go up by 8 because the return above inflation is relatively constant. So the only thing that I would say is it's baked in, it's part of the price, it's part of
Sure.
the return expectation that you have. When you do your planning, make sure that if you're going to adjust your return expectations, that you adjust your inflation expectations along with them, because one is part of the other.
That totally makes sense, and it's kind of hard for people to understand when they don't look at all the numbers. One thing people do understand, though, is the price of making a decision. And I recently spoke with someone here in Colorado who purchased a new home It was his first home he ever bought, and it was around $400,000. And with the interest rates, it was his mortgage is going to probably be around $3,000 to $3,300 a month. When a couple years ago, when the interest rates were lower, that would have been maybe $1,000 or less. But some people are afraid to get into the housing market because prices are so high or because interest rates are so high. What would you say to someone who's afraid to get invested starting on their investment plans, whether it's an IRA or just to buy some exchange traded funds or mutual funds because the prices are so high right now?
Well, I think you should first off do whatever is suitable. So you shouldn't let valuations drive your decision making too much. At some point, if you're going to buy a house before you're 35 and you're 31,
Hmm.
then do whatever you have to do. But one way or the other, you've got to make the decision to do what needs to be done to be able
Sure.
to buy that house in 4 years' time. Uh, but the other thing that I would say is be rational. Think about what you're doing in terms of your life goals. And if you're, for instance, setting a goal of buying a house by the time you're 35, then don't let the fact that interest rates are higher or lower, and by extension, mortgage rates are higher or lower, throw you off course. In the long run, it's probably not going to make a big difference where whatever mortgage rates are in 2024 or 2026 or 2028. If you're going to buy this house in the next 2, 4, 5 years and live in it for the next 40 years, 40 years from now, the difference of mortgage rates of 1 or 2% and
Sure.
the difference in the price of the property on the day you buy it by $10 or $15,000 is probably not going to make a big difference in terms of what the property is worth when you're 65 or 70.
Yeah, absolutely. Some people want to get started in their investments. They don't really know how, and a lot of people just sign up for their 401k with their company. What are the first few steps a person should have today when it comes to getting involved in their retirement, in their investment portfolios? When all they really know is a 401k, maybe they can look at their site on Fidelity or Schwab. How should I get involved in my retirement if I don't really know what to do?
Well, the first thing, if you've got a 401k opportunity, take it. If you've got a chance to get any kind of money coming from your employer, by all means, this is free money. You're putting money in and your employer is matching on some ratio. By all means, get the free money.
Sure.
So the first thing that you have to do is actually enlist in the program and don't wait. Run, don't walk. Enlist at the first opportunity. Then the next thing is what we talked about a moment ago, Bradley. Like you've got to get a good handle on your risk profile. And if you're a young investor who doesn't have a lot of experience, but you know that this is your retirement money and you know you're not going to be touching it for 25 or 30 or more years, then you should have some capacity to invest fairly aggressively. And I'm not going to say 100% in stocks, but it should have a fairly significant equity component to it. And you just need to be able to sleep at night. Now, if you want to learn, by all means, read some books, go to some websites, learn what you can, go to Fidelity, go to Schwab, whatever you have to do. The other thing is just be sure that you diversify. Like if
Mm,
you're gonna say, well, I'm bullish on, for instance, U.S. stocks, and they're expensive right now. Well, if you have an opportunity to put money into the stock market writ
hmm.
large, because
Right.
you've got domestic stocks, but you've also got foreign stocks, and maybe you've got emerging markets, and maybe you've got options in terms of small cap or large cap or growth or value. Don't put all the money into just one product or one strategy. Diversify by geography, diversify by asset class, diversify by management style, so as to smooth out the expectations. And some of those things will not do so well, but some of them will do really well. And it's not about hitting it out of the park. It's about being consistent and staying in the game.
Awesome. I appreciate that. And, I'm in my mid 30s and I didn't really start taking my retirement seriously until my, mid to late 20s. And then I started gaining a lot of financial knowledge. Before we wrap it up, there are people around my age who are in their mid 30s who kind of have that wiggle room. What about people who are nearing retirement, whether they're 15 to 5 years from retirement and they haven't taken much advantage of whether it's a 401k or other stock portfolios? Are there any steps that you can take as you're nearing retirement within the 5 to 10 years to really maximize your retirement?
When you're doing retirement planning, you really only have four choices in terms of how to get further ahead. You can either save more money. So instead of putting aside $1,500 a month, we put aside $2,000 a month or whatever. Most people can't or won't. You can invest the money more aggressively. Most people shouldn't, but it's an option. You can accept a lesser lifestyle in retirement. So you say, "Oh, I'm going to retire when I'm 65, and I'm just going to have whatever $48,000 a year of income." When you take all the different sources into consideration, I would have liked to have had 55 or whatever, but that's all I have, so I have to accept a lower lifestyle. Or the fourth option, which is my personal favorite, most people, if you're working in a white collar job and you're in good health, should work longer. There's a lot of evidence that people, well, we're all living longer in the 21st century, and so as life expectancy goes up, life in retirement goes up, and then the money that you've got saved up in your nest egg is going to have to last longer than you might have otherwise expected. If you enjoy what you do and you're in good health, it keeps your mind sharp. It allows you to, if you work an extra 3 years, not only is it three
Sure.
more years of saving, it's also 3 years that you're not drawing down on what you've already
That's a
saved.
good point. Yeah.
So the impact of actually being able to work just a little bit longer can have massive leverage in terms
Hmm.
of having that money last as long as you need it to last with the lifestyle that you want to have.
Of course. That's amazing advice. And I recently wrote and made a video about compound interest and how really time is one of the most important components of compound interest. You need more time for your money to work. But that's all I have for you today. And I really appreciate you being on. Was there any last words or any last pieces of advice, whether it comes to being risk averse or emotions or anything else you'd like to tell our listeners?
Well, if I get a chance, I'll plug the book one more time.
Of
So my
course.
book is called Bullshift: How Optimism Bias Threatens Your Finances, and it's about behavioral finance as it applies to 2024 and how the industry is shifting us, making us think bullish things about what's going on when realism might be in order. The other thing that I would say is I've got a podcast of my own called Make Better Wealth Decisions, and we have a guest every week, and we talk about a lot of the things that you talk about, Bradley. So I think it'd be a good compliment.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate you joining us. And I believe I saw that book on Amazon. You can buy it on paperback and Kindle, if I'm not mistaken. And I believe it's a little bit cheaper that way too for those who are interested. John, I appreciate you coming on today. You have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thanks, Bradley.
Thanks. And that's all we have for you today. I hope you enjoyed the show and learned a thing or two from John. You can find John's book, Bullshift: How Optimism Bias Threatens Your Finances, on Amazon for sale on paperback, audiobook, and Kindle. Once again, my name is Bradley Valentine, and have a great day.